Hi, my name's Chaz, and you're watching Chaz's Languages. In this video, we'll be talking about and learning the possessive pronouns, how to say you have something, the informal and formal imperative, and the irregular present tense verbs in Finnish. Hi you guys, thank you for watching and welcome to the second Finnish lesson. Today we'll be talking about possessive pronouns, regular present tense verbs, how to say you have something, and the informal and formal imperative in Finnish. So first let's start off with the regular present tense verbs. I mentioned them shortly in the last video, but I didn't want to go into them yet. I wanted to save them for the next video, so here they are. The first one is the verb olla, which is a very, very common verb in Finnish, probably the most common verb that you'll use in Finnish because it means to be. And it's only irregular in the third person. So in the third person singular and the third person plural. So last video we talked about the personal pronouns, but I'll go over those again briefly. For I, minä, you, sinä, he or she, hän, it, se, we, me, you all, or you guys, te, they, he for people, and ne for objects or things. So the different forms of olla for all the different pronouns are I am, minä olen. You are, sinä olet. For he or she is, hän on, and for it is, se on. And see, that one's a little bit irregular. As we talked about in the last video, this verb falls into the category of verb type 3. So usually you would just drop off the LA and add an E and then the personal ending. But in the third person singular, it's ON, which is irregular. And then for we are, me olemme. You all are, te olette. They are, for people, he ovat, or things, ne ovat. And see, that one's also very irregular. It's not like any of the other forms. And so for the next verb, nähdä, which means to see. Now it's irregular because it has a K that appears in the third person, singular and plural, and then an E that appears in all the other forms. So for example, if you want to say I see, you would say minä näen, and that's where an E comes in. But for the third person singular, you would say hän näkee, he sees. So you add a K in there, and then you double the E at the end. So that's one of the regular forms. And then for you all see, you would say te näette. So again, you just add in the E, and then you add the personal ending for te, which is TTE for verbs. And then for the third person plural, you add the ending VAT. And in this form, it's also like the third person singular where a K comes in. But instead of having two E's at the end, you just have one E at the end. And then you add VAT onto the end of that. So in all, the verb becomes näkevät. So they see would be he näkevät. And the next verb, juosta, which means to run. Now usually a verb like this, you would decline by just dropping off the TA and adding an E and then the personal ending. But in this case, a K actually appears before the SE. So for example, if you want to say I run, you would take the verb juosta, drop off the TA, and add a K before the S, and then add an E to the end, and then the personal ending for the I form, which is N for verbs. So in all, it becomes minä juoksen. And for the third person plural, they run, take the verb, and you again add a K before the SC, drop off the TA, add in an E, and then the personal ending for the they form, which is VAT. So in all together, that becomes he juoksevat, they run. And the last verb is tehdä, and it's similar to the verb nähdä in the sense that it also ends in DA, and it also adds a K in the middle in the third person singular and plural. So in this case, this verb is a little bit different because the H drops out of the middle of it. So for example, for the first person singular, I do, you would drop the H and the DA, and then add an extra E, and then the N for the I form of the verb, and that becomes minä teen, I do. And for the third person singular, he or she does, you would take the verb, drop the H and the DA, add a K, and then add two E's at the end. And that becomes han teke. Or for the third person plural, you do the same thing, except instead of adding two E's at the end, you just add one E and then add VAT for the third person plural ending for verbs. So that becomes he tekevat. And so that does it for the regular present tense verbs in Finnish. So now let's move on to how to say I have something, you have something, etc. So, and the reason I'm doing this one separately is because it's not like in English or other languages such as German, where you can just have a verb that declines in the different forms to say I have. In this case, you use a special form of the personal pronouns plus the third person singular form of the verb olla, which is on. So I'll just go through the different forms of the pronouns in this special form, and then I'll talk about how you use the verb olla with this form. So first, the I form, mina, becomes minula, and then the you form, sina, becomes sinula, and then the he-she form becomes henela, the it form becomes sila, the we form becomes mela, and the you-all form becomes tela, and then the they form becomes heila for people or nila for things. And then as I had mentioned earlier, you use the third person singular form of the verb olla, which is on. So for example, if you want to say I have, you take that form, minula, and then add third person singular of the verb olla, on, and put it together and it becomes minula on, and that means I have. So for example, if you want to say I have a house, you would say minula on talo. Or if you want to say they have, for example, if you're talking about houses, nila on ikunoita. That means they have windows. Or if you want to say, for example, we have an apple, you would say meillä on omena. So this is fairly straightforward and easy. It's just a little bit different than other languages because instead of having an actual verb to say I have, you have, etc., you have a special form of the pronoun and then you use the verb to be in the third person singular. So it's just a little bit different. And next, I'd like to move on to personal pronouns and the personal pronoun endings that you add to words whenever you want to say my dog, your cat, his house, our apple, your world, etc. So first I'll go through the personal pronouns. My is minun. Yours is sinun. His or her is hänen. Its is sin. Ours is meidän. You all's or you guys's, depending on your English dialect, is teidän. And then theirs for people is heidän, or for things is niiden. And Finnish is a little bit different because in the formal language at least, in written text and books, newspapers, etc., they use also an ending on the word for possession, and usually they omit the possessive pronoun. So in a formal context or in the official way, you would add an I to the end of a word to say my. So for example, apple, you add the ni, becomes omenani, that means my apple. And again, usually this is in a formal context. If I wanted to speak more colloquial, I would say minun omena, or even in a really spoken language context, mun omena, and mun is just a short form of minun. And then for your, that word ending is si, si. So for example, if you want to say your house, you would say talosi. And for his or her, the ending is nsa. So for example, if you want to say her light, you would say valonsa. But in this case, in the third person singular and plural, you actually have to use the pronoun because it's unclear, because in the third person singular and plural, the word ending for the possessive is the same, nsa. So you would have to actually say hänen valonsa if you wanted to specify it's his or her instead of their. And then for it's also nsa. So for example, if you wanted to say its table, you would actually have to use the possessive pronoun sin to specify you mean its, and then nsa at the end. So altogether that becomes sin payutansa, its table. And then the word ending for r is mme, me. So for example, if you wanted to say our book, you could say kirjamme. And then for saying you all's or you guys's, the word ending is nne, ne. So for example, if you wanted to say you guys's camera, you could say komaranne. And then for the third person plural, as I mentioned earlier, it has the same word ending as the third person singular, so you actually have to use the pronoun. So for example, if you wanted to say their, as in for people, language, you would say heidän kielensä. And the nominative or the dictionary form of that verb is actually kieli, but in this case, the I turns into an E, and I'll actually talk about that in a future video. That's just a thing in Finnish where certain words that end in I, the I becomes an E whenever you add an ending to it. And for the last topic of today's video, we'll talk about the imperative, which is used in Finnish for giving commands. And there's an informal and formal form of this. So first, I'll start off with the informal form, which is used whenever you're talking to friends, your parents, family, pretty much anyone else. You usually don't use the formal that often. And actually, the formal form is actually used also for the plural. So first, I'll start off with the informal form. And since it's different for each verb type, I will talk about each verb type separately in this form. So for verbs in verb type 1, which end in AA or another vowel in A, you just drop off the second A, and that's it. You just drop off that last A, and then you have the informal imperative form of the verb type 1. Now for verb type 2, which to remind you ends in DA, you just drop off the DA, and that's it. You have the imperative form. So for example, if you wanted to say eat, you would say syö. So you drop off the DA from the verb syödä, and it becomes syö. And for verb type 3, which ends in a consonant, another consonant, and then A, you just drop off the last consonant in the A and add an E. So for example, if you wanted to tell someone to smile, you take the verb hymyillä, then you drop off the LA, add an E, and that becomes hymyile. For verb type 4, which ends in ATA, what you do is you drop off the TA and you add another A. So for example, for the verb korjata, you drop off the TA, add another A to the end, and it becomes korja. So you can tell someone korja if you want them to fix something. So for verb type 5, which ends in ITA, you drop off the TA and add in TSE, and that's it. You have the imperative. So for example, for the verb mainita, you drop off the TA, add in TSE, and it becomes mainitse, and that means mention. Now there is the verb type 6 that I talked about in the last video, but you would almost never use the imperative with that verb form because those are usually intransitive verbs that mean to warm up, to become cold, or something like that. So I'm not going to cover that in this video just for that sake, because you'll never ever run into that, at least never in a day-to-day situation. And now I'd like to move on to the formal and plural form of the imperative, which is a little bit easier actually, because really all you do is take the verb, drop off the verb stem, and add KAA. So for example, for verb type 1, as I talked about for the informal, you drop off the A and it becomes puhu, speak. But in this case, you drop off the A and add KAA, and it becomes puhuka, which means speak if you're talking to someone formally or to a group of people. And then for verb type 2, drop off the DA and again add KAA. So for the verb syödä, to eat, drop off DA, add KAA, becomes syökä. So for example, if you're talking to a group of children and you want them to eat, you say syökä, and that means eat. And then for verb type 3, which ends in 2 consonants and an A, you drop off the last consonant in the A and then add KAA. So for example, for the verb ajatella, which means think, you would drop off the LA, add KAA, and it becomes ajattelkaa, which means think. And then for verb type 4, which ends in ATA, you just drop off the last A and add KAA. So for example, if you want a group of people to fix something, you take the verb korjata, which is verb type 4, you drop off the last A and add KAA, and that becomes korjatkaa. And it's also the same way for verb type 5, which ends in ITA. So for example, the verb mainita, which means to mention, you just drop off the last A and add KAA, so it becomes mainitka. So if you want to tell a group of people mention, you just say mainitka. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about how to say the don't form of the imperative. So for example, if you're speaking informally and you want to tell someone not to do something, you just use the word älä before the imperative form. So for example, for the verb puhua, which becomes puhu in the informal imperative, you just add älä in front of it to mean don't speak, which is älä puhu. Or if you wanted to say don't smile, you take the verb hymyillä and take the imperative form hymyile, in the informal, and then add alla in front of that, and that becomes alla humile, don't smile. And then for this form in the formal or plural, it's a little bit different. Instead of alla, you use alca. And then you take the verb stem like you usually would if you're telling someone to do something in the formal imperative. When you add kaa, you add, in this case, ko. So for example, if you want to tell a group of people, don't do something, you take the verb tehta, drop off the da, add in ko, and then add alka at the beginning, and that becomes alka teka, don't do. Or if you want to tell a group of children, for example, not to swim somewhere, and you want to say don't swim, then you take the verb oida, which means to swim, drop off the da, add on ko, and then add alka to the beginning of that, and that becomes alka oiko. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and like the Facebook page for notifications and updates, as well as more tips and advice for language learning, and then follow the Twitter page for updates and notifications for the channel. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.